Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are and whenever you are. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 9 of The Devil and the Deep Blue Me, and I am your host, Rich Bruck. Today, I want to dive into something that might sound counterintuitive or maybe even a little pessimistic at first. The trouble with chasing happiness. Not the trouble with being happy, that's great when it happens, but the trouble with making happiness into a goal or a destination, something we're supposed to achieve and maintain. What I've noticed is the more directly I pursue happiness, the more it just seems to slip away. The more I focus on being happy as the primary goal of my life, the more I end up feeling like I'm failing at the most basic requirement of human existence. And I'm pretty sure I'm not alone in this. We live in a culture absolutely obsessed with happiness. Advertisements, they tell us where to find it. In this car, that vacation, these products. And self-help books, they promise to reveal the secrets of lasting happiness. And motivational speakers, they sell us formulas and systems for achieving just that. While all along, social media shows us everyone else's happy moments, creating the impression that happiness is the default state for people who have their lives all figured out. And we almost helplessly believe that happiness is something we should be able to achieve permanently. If only we do the right things, buy the right things, think the right thoughts, arrange our lives in the right configuration. When we're not happy, we assume we're doing something wrong, that we've somehow failed at this fundamental life task. But what if the pursuit of happiness itself is the problem? What if treating happiness as the primary goal actually prevents us from experiencing the deeper, more sustainable states that give life its real meaning and its real texture? And that's what we're going to explore today. Happiness. We spend our lives running after it like some kind of prize at the end of the race. Like there's this finish line where we finally cross over into permanent contentment, and everything before that is just preparation, just waiting for the real good part of life to begin. Entire industries have been built around this very pursuit. Happiness coaches, happiness apps, happiness journals, happiness retreats. The billion-dollar wellness industry basically exists to sell us the idea that happiness is something that we can manufacture through the right combination of mindfulness and gratitude practices and positive thinking and lifestyle optimization. And I've tried a lot of it. I've done the gratitude journals, the positive affirmations, the mindfulness meditations. I've read the books about choosing happiness, about the happiness advantage and authentic happiness and stumbling on happiness and the happiness project. And some of these practices have been very helpful. I'm not dismissing them entirely, but what I have discovered is that when you make happiness the goal, when you're constantly evaluating whether you're happy enough, whether you're experiencing the right kind of happiness, whether your happiness is sustainable and authentic, then the pursuit itself becomes extremely exhausting. And you end up constantly monitoring your emotional state, constantly judging whether you're measuring up to some imagined standard of contentment. And here's what I know now. Happiness is not a permanent state of being. It's fleeting. It's a spark, a moment, a rise and fall tide that comes and goes with rhythms that you can't control. And treating it like it should be your default emotion baseline is basically setting yourself up for constant disappointment. The trouble is, when we chase happiness as though it's the only goal worth having, we miss the quieter, the subtle states, the things that actually give life its real depth and sustainability. Peace, contentment, presence, simple acceptance of whatever is happening right at the moment. And these states might not feel quite as exciting as happiness, but they're often more valuable because they're more accessible, more sustainable, and less dependent on external circumstances. When I think about the happiest times in my life, They were never planned. They never came from following a formula or achieving a goal. They came in sideways, laughing with a friend until we both had tears streaming down our faces over something that probably wasn't even that funny, or stumbling onto a song on the radio that fit my mood perfectly, and it felt like the universe had queued it up just for me. or standing in the backyard watching a sunset and feeling this brief, intense connection to being alive, even though I knew the moment would disappear in just a few minutes. None of those things could have been chased. They just simply happened. They emerged from being present and available for whatever life was offering in that moment, not from trying to manufacture a specific emotional state. So maybe happiness isn't something that we should chase at all. Maybe it's something we should allow, something that we notice when it shows up, something that we appreciate without trying to hold on to it permanently. And maybe the real danger is that in our obsession with being happy, we miss out on actually being alive, which includes a full range of experiences, many of which aren't happy, but they are still very meaningful, and they're valuable, and they're necessary. Because life isn't just happiness. Life is also grief and frustration and boredom and uncertainty and quiet contentment and occasional joy and long stretches of just being here, doing what needs to be done, experiencing whatever's arising without judging it against some standard of what you're supposed to be feeling. What if we gave ourselves permission to not be happy all the time? What if we stopped treating sadness and anxiety and boredom or frustration as problems to be solved and started treating them as normal parts of being human? What if the goal wasn't to be happy, but to be present to whatever is actually happening now, including the difficult or the uncomfortable parts? Let's start by looking at how we got here. How happiness became something that we're supposed to pursue constantly, measure carefully, and feel bad about it if we're not experiencing enough. This isn't how humans have always thought about happiness. For most of human history, happiness was considered a byproduct of living well or acting virtuously or being in right relationship with your community and your values. It wasn't the goal itself, it was what sometimes resulted from pursuing other goals. But somewhere in this modern era, particularly in American culture, happiness became elevated to the primary objective of human life. The pursuit of happiness is literally written into our founding documents, treated as an inalienable right alongside life and liberty. And once happiness became the goal, it became something that could be sold. Products promise happiness. Services guarantee satisfaction. Experiences are marketed as opportunities for joy. The implicit message is that happiness is something that you can buy, achieve, create through the right combination of circumstances. And I see this in advertising for musical equipment all the time. The message isn't, this guitar sounds good. It's, this guitar will make you happy. It will unlock your creative potential. It will transform your experience of making music. The product becomes a vehicle for emotional transformation rather than just a tool. And the self-help industry has exploded around this idea that happiness is achievable through the right mindset, through the right habits, through the right way of thinking. And again, some of these techniques are actually very useful, but the underlying assumption that happiness should be your default state and anything less is a problem to solve, that assumption might be causing more suffering than it actually relieves. We've started measuring happiness like it's a metric that we can track and optimize. Happiness surveys and life satisfaction scores. Countries are ranked by how happy their citizens are. There are apps that prompt you multiple times a day to rate your current happiness level. And when you're constantly evaluating your happiness, constantly asking yourself, am I happy? Should I be happier? What would make me happier? You create this meta level of consciousness that's always judging your immediate experience against some standard. And that judging mind, that evaluating consciousness, That's exactly what prevents you from being fully present for whatever's actually happening. And social media has made this exponentially worse. You're not just comparing your happiness to your own expectations, you're comparing it to everyone else's curated presentations of their happiest moments. You see people's vacation photos, celebration posts, milestone achievements, and you think, well, that's what their daily experience must look like. And this creates tremendous pressure to not only be happy, but to perform happiness, to present yourself as someone else who's figured out how to maintain that positive, upbeat, grateful state that we're all supposed to be, living. Even when you're not feeling it, you feel pressure to act like you are. And the result is what's been called toxic positivity, this cultural pressure to maintain a positive outlook regardless of circumstances, to always focus on the bright side and to treat any negative emotion as something to be quickly fixed or transcended rather than as a valid piece of information about your experience. And I have felt this pressure in creative communities especially. There's this expectation that artists should be passionate, inspired, deeply fulfilled by their work. When I'm going through a dry spell, when making music feels more like obligation than joy, there's this sense that I'm doing it wrong, that I've somehow failed at having the right relationship with my art. So, if happiness isn't a permanent state that we should be striving for, well, then what is it? What's a more realistic, more useful way to think about happiness? I've come to think of happiness as a wave rather than a platform. It rises, it peaks, and it falls. Sometimes the waves are big and dramatic, and sometimes they're small little ripples, but they're always temporary, always in motion. Expecting to stand on top of a wave permanently isn't just unrealistic and stupid, it's a misunderstanding of what waves are. Happiness also seems to depend on contrast. You appreciate sunshine more after it's rained. You appreciate connection more after you've been alone for a while. You appreciate success much more after you've struggled to achieve it. If everything were happiness all the time, the word would lose its meaning because there'd be nothing to distinguish it from. And this is basic music theory, actually. Tension and resolution. A song that's all resolution, all major chords, all pleasant harmonies, well, it gets boring very, very quickly. The beauty comes from the movement between tension and release, dissonance and consonance. And life is the exact same way. Happiness seems to work best as a byproduct rather than a goal. When I'm fully absorbed in playing music, when I'm deeply engaged in a conversation with someone that I care about, or when I'm focused on helping a student break through this technical challenge, happiness sometimes shows up in those moments. But it comes from the engagement itself, not from trying to actually be happy. And there's this psychological phenomenon called hedonic adaptation, the tendency to return to a baseline level of happiness after both positive and negative events. Win the lottery, and after a few months, you'll probably be about as happy as you were before. Experience a tragedy, and after time, you'll likely adapt back toward your normal baseline. This creates what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill. You achieve something that makes you happy. You adapt to the new circumstances. You need to achieve something else to get that happiness boost again. It's an endless cycle where happiness is always just ahead of wherever you currently are now. What actually seems more sustainable than chasing happiness is cultivating contentment, a deeper, quieter satisfaction with what is, rather than constant excitement about what could be. Contentment doesn't spike and crash the way happiness does. It's more like a low, steady hum of basic okayness with your life. And underneath contentment is something even more fundamental: peace. Not the peace of having everything figured out or having no problems, but the peace of being able to present with whatever's arising without constantly fighting it or trying to change it into something else. Happiness tends to happen in the present moment when you're fully here for what's actually happening rather than lost in thoughts about what should be happening or what you wish were happening. But when you're actively chasing happiness, you're pulled out of the present moment into fantasies about a future where you'll finally be happy. So what if instead of chasing happiness, we gave ourselves permission to experience the full range of human emotions without judgment? To feel sad when sad things happen, or anxious when facing uncertainty, and bored when life is mundane, and of course frustrated when things don't work out, and yes, happy when those moments actually naturally arise. This doesn't mean wallowing in negative emotions or cultivating suffering. It means developing emotional literacy, the ability to recognize, name, and accept what you're feeling without adding the secondary layer of judgment about whether you should be feeling something different. So if we're not supposed to chase happiness, which we'd be doing more of instead, what's healthier, more sustainable, or what's a better approach to more emotional well-being? Well, I think we need to shift from pursuing happiness to cultivating presence. Instead of asking, am I happy? Try asking, am I here? Am I actually experiencing what's happening right now, or am I lost in thoughts about what should be happening? I have been practicing this in my daily guitar practice, actually. Instead of evaluating whether practicing is making me happy, I try to just be fully present with the sound, the physical sensation of playing, the gradual development of a skill. Sometimes it's enjoyable, and sometimes it's frustrating, and sometimes it's just neutral. But when I'm fully present, the quality of the experience is far richer, regardless of whether I'd label it as being happy. A meaningful life will include plenty of moments that aren't happy. Struggle, sacrifice, dealing with difficult truths, facing uncomfortable realities, but those moments can be very valuable. They can contribute to a life that you feel good about living, even when they're not really pleasant in the moment. Music lessons isn't always fun or happiness-inducing. Some days it's repetitive, draining, requires patience that I just don't have, but it's meaningful to me. Helping people connect with music and watching someone work through challenges and gradually improving, the meaning makes it worthwhile, even when the moment-to-moment experience isn't necessarily happy. And I would develop your capacity to be with the full range of human experience, not just the pleasant emotions, but the difficult ones too. Grief, anger, fear, uncertainty. These aren't problems to be solved. They're part of being alive. And when you can be present with the difficult emotions without immediately trying to fix or escape them, they lose some of their power to destabilize you. And this is what acceptance and commitment therapy calls psychological flexibility, the ability to be with whatever is arising without getting caught in the struggle within it. You don't have to like what you're feeling, but you can acknowledge it and make space for it and let it be present without letting it dictate your actions. And when happiness does arise, notice it without trying to hold on to it or make it last longer. Appreciate it like you'd appreciate a good song on the radio. Enjoy it while it's playing, but don't expect it to go on forever. I've noticed that when I try to prolong moments of happiness, when I try to grab onto them and make them last, the grasping itself seems to kill the experience. It's like trying to hold water in your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the more it leaks out. And I'd focus on creating conditions that tend to support well-being rather than trying to manufacture specific emotional outcomes. Good relationships, meaningful work, physical health, creative expression, service to others, these things don't guarantee happiness, but they create the soil in which happiness is more likely to, occasionally bloom. It's like gardening. You can't make a flower grow by force. You can create good soil, provide water and sunlight and, remove weeds, but then sometimes flowers happen and sometimes they don't. But you can't control the blooming. You can only tend to the conditions. And I would certainly practice appreciation without the pressure of mandatory gratitude. Noticing good things when they're present is different from feeling obligated to be grateful for everything. You can acknowledge that you're going through a difficult time while also noticing moments of beauty or connection or ease when they arise. And finally, I guess I would accept that a realistic emotional baseline includes a lot of neutral territory. Most of life isn't peak happiness or deep suffering. It's the mundane middle, the ordinary moments of just doing what needs to be done, and that's okay. That's not a problem. That's just what being alive usually feels like. Let me tell you about this day that really completely changed how I think about happiness and what actually makes life feel a little more worthwhile. This was a few years ago during a particularly difficult period. I was dealing with some health issues that weren't serious, but were persistent and annoying. And money was tight. And a relationship that I had been in for a while had ended. And I was in one of those phases where if someone had asked me, are you happy? The honest answer would have been not even kind of. And anyway, I had a guitar lesson scheduled with this student. Let's call him Marcus. And he'd been working with me for about 6 months. And Marcus was in his late 50s dealing with his own difficult circumstances. He'd recently lost his job in a corporate reconstructing. His marriage was falling apart. And he started taking guitar lessons as something to do with his suddenly abundant free time. So there we were, two people who were decidedly not happy, sitting there in my teaching studio on a gray Tuesday afternoon. And neither one of us was pretending otherwise. We'd gotten past the social performance stage, where you say everything's fine when really it's not. And Marcus had been struggling with this one song for a few weeks. I don't know, I can't even remember the song, but it had some tricky chord transitions. And that day, that Tuesday afternoon, something clicked. His fingers found the changes very smoothly. The rhythm fell into place, and suddenly he was playing the song all the way through without even stopping. And when he finished, we both just sat there for a moment. And then he looked at me and he said, "God, that felt good." Not that made me happy or now everything's better, just that felt good. And this simple acknowledgement of a moment of satisfaction in the middle of an otherwise difficult time, it was really kind of cool. And we ended up talking about how strange it was that we could both be going through hard times and still have this genuine moment of shared satisfaction over something as simple as playing a song well. How that moment didn't fix anything. It didn't make our problems go away, but it was still valuable and still very, very much worth experiencing. And that's when I realized I'd been thinking about happiness as an overall state that colored everything. Either you were happy or you weren't. But actually, life is more textured than that. You can be unhappy with your circumstances while still experiencing moments of satisfaction, moments of connection, moments of simple pleasure. The moments don't require the circumstances to change. They just require presence and honest acknowledgement of what's actually happening. And there was something very relieving about not having to pretend to be happy, not having to maintain the performance of positivity or gratitude or finding the silver lining. We could just be two people dealing with hard times and also experiencing this one little good thing together. And that lesson was meaningful in a way that transcended mood. I wasn't happy before it, and I wasn't happy after it, but it certainly mattered. It contributed to a sense that life was worth living even when it wasn't going very well, that there was still these small moments of connection or accomplishment available, even during these difficult times. Marcus continued his lessons with me for another year, and his circumstances gradually improved. He found a new job and worked things out with his wife and developed into a decent guitar player, actually. And mine improved too, eventually. But what I remember most isn't the happy times that came later. It's that gray Tuesday afternoon when we were both struggling and still managed to share a genuine moment of satisfaction over something very simple. And that experience taught me that maybe the goal isn't to be happy. Maybe it's to be alive to whatever is actually present, including the small satisfactions, the brief connections, those simple pleasures that don't require your overall life circumstances to be going fantastic. So here's what I want you to take away from all of this questioning of the happiness pursuit. First, happiness is not a problem to solve or a permanent state to achieve. It's a temporary experience that comes and goes just like the weather. Expecting to be happy all the time is like expecting it to be sunny all the time. It's not how emotional life works. Aim for presence over positivity. Being fully here for what's actually happening, even when it's not pleasant, is more valuable and more sustainable than trying to manufacture specific emotional states. Prioritize meaning over mood. A life that's deeply meaningful will include plenty of moments that aren't happy. That's not a problem. That's the full experience of being human. And give yourself permission to feel the full range of emotions without judging them as good or as bad, without treating negative emotions as problems that need immediate fixing. Sadness, anxiety, frustration, boredom, these are all normal parts of being alive. When happiness does show up, notice it and appreciate it without trying to hold on to it or to make it permanent. Enjoy the wave while it's there and then let it go when it passes. And finally, focus on creating conditions that support well-being rather than chasing specific emotional outcomes. Good relationships, meaningful work, creative expression, service to others, these things don't guarantee happiness, but they create a life worth living regardless of your moment-to-moment emotional state. And there's something very deeply freeing about releasing the obligation to be happy all the time, about accepting that life includes difficulty, that growth often involves discomfort, and that meaning doesn't require constant positivity. So maybe stop chasing happiness. Be present instead. Build a meaningful life instead. Allow the full range of human experience instead of trying to optimize for one particular emotion. And trust that when you're fully alive to whatever's actually happening, that's enough, regardless of whether you'd label it as happy. Anyway, now it is time for this week's segment of enRICHment, where we explore some of the fascinating perspectives this week on happiness and well-being. Did you know the word happiness comes from the Old Norse word hap, meaning chance or luck? Yeah, that's right. Built right into the word is the idea that happiness was once thought of as something accidental, something that happens to us rather than something that we can manufacture or control. And the medieval English word happy originally meant lucky or fortunate. It wasn't primarily about emotional state at all, but about favorable circumstances. And maybe there's wisdom in that older understanding. Happiness as something that occasionally befalls us rather than something that we should be constantly pursuing. For Aristotle, it wasn't an emotional state. It was about the quality of how you lived, not the quality of how you felt moment to moment. And also, here's something from modern psychology. Research on life satisfaction shows that people who pursue happiness as a primary goal tend to be less happy than people who pursue meaning, connection, or personal growth. The direct pursuit of happiness seems to be self-defeating. Happiness is more likely to arise as a byproduct of doing other things that you care about. And what strikes me about all of this wisdom, these traditions and research findings, they all point to the same insight. Happiness isn't something to chase directly. It's something that sometimes emerges when you're focused on living well or being present or contributing to something larger than yourself. And maybe our modern obsession with pursuing happiness directly is actually preventing us from experiencing the states that would naturally give rise to happiness. Maybe we've been looking in the wrong direction all along. Anyway, the evidence seems to suggest that happiness works best when it's not the goal, when it's allowed to arise from a life well lived rather than pursued. And then finally, for a quick music update, as it connects today's theme in an interesting sort of way. I've been working on a few new songs lately, and I've been noticing something. The songs I write when I'm trying to capture happiness, when I'm trying to express joy or contentment, they suck. They're not convincing at all. But the songs that come from a more complex emotion, they feel more alive. They feel more real. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Maybe because happiness is simple and generic, while the more complicated emotions are very specific and textured. Or maybe because when I'm trying to express happiness, I'm performing something that I think I should feel. But the messier emotions, it's stuff I've actually lived and experienced. Anyway, I have this one new song about the experience of missing someone while also appreciating the time you had together. It's not quite sad, and it's not quite happy, just this complex mix of loss and gratitude. And that emotional complexity makes the song a little more interesting in a way that, straightforward happiness songs, at least for me, they don't. I've also noticed that audiences, they tend to connect more with songs that acknowledge emotional complexity rather than songs that are just positive. Maybe because people actually, live lives that are a little more complex, and hearing it reflected in their music makes them feel a little seen or a little understood. I don't know. Anyway, if you want to hear some of these explorations or my new songs as they're done, you can find links to my Spotify and Apple Music and all those wonderful places in the channel description here on YouTube. And if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe and, catch this podcast and whatever I happen to be doing at the time. I would love your support. It means a lot to me. Anyway, maybe the goal in music, like in life, isn't to capture happiness. It's to capture truth. And truth is usually more complicated. It's definitely more interesting and ultimately a lot more satisfying than simple happiness could ever be. So, my friends, that is episode 9, exploring why chasing happiness might be preventing us from actually experiencing the depth and richness of being alive. Recording this episode, I'm well aware that some people might hear this as pessimistic or as giving up on feeling good, but I actually think it's the opposite. It's giving up on an unrealistic expectation that causes constant disappointment and replacing it with something that's more achievable. The ability to be present for whatever's actually happening, whether it's good or whether it's bad. It's still something I'm working on. I still catch myself evaluating my happiness, still find myself thinking, I should be happier about this, or why aren't I happier about that? But I'm getting better at noticing when I'm doing it and, redirecting it toward a more simple presence instead of emotional evaluation. And what I would like to hear from you is, what is one time when you weren't happy, but your life still felt meaningful or worthwhile? When you experienced satisfaction or connection or purpose, even though your normal circumstances weren't particularly all that great. Send me a comment or a message and share the story. I think we need a few more examples of this, because I think we need to collectively release this obligation to be happy all the time and to reframe success as something other than constant positive emotion, and to make space for the full range of human experience without treating difficulty as failure. A life worth living isn't the same as a life that's constantly happy. A life worth living includes meaning, connection, growth, service, presence, and all of those things can exist and be valuable even during periods where happiness is noticeably or notably absent. So maybe stop asking, am I happy? And start asking, am I present? Am I living in alignment with what matters to me? Am I allowing myself to experience what's actually here instead of what I wish were here? And those questions might lead somewhere far more sustainable than the actual pursuit of happiness ever could. Be present, build meaning, allow the full range, and trust that life well lived will include plenty of happiness along the way. even if it's not the primary goal. And while you're practicing the art of being alive rather than just happy, please have yourself a safe and happy week. You know what? Maybe just have a week. I think that's more honest than have a happy week. Have whatever the hell week you're going to have and just know that's enough.